Apple fritters are a quick batter filled with fresh apples, and you usually deep fry them. I wanted to find out, can I make them just as delicious in my air fryer? Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. Today we're gonna make a really simple recipe for apple fritters. Normally it's just a quick batter with some diced apples and then you throw them into the deep fryer or you can pan fry them. But I wanted to see, can you air fry them and still have them really crisp on the outside and then fluffy with those diced apples on the inside? So I tried it a couple of ways, didn't work out so well. Now I'm gonna show you how you can do it in your own air fryer at home, super easy. All right, so the first thing you need is an apple. You can get any kind of apple you want. This is a Gala apple, but you can use Granny Smith, any kind you want, or you can use a combination of different kinds of apples if you want. You just need one though for this recipe if you're gonna make 4 apple fritters. If you wanna make up a double batch, you absolutely can, just double all the ingredients. We need 1 cup of diced apples. You need 1 egg that we're gonna separate, and that becomes very important in this recipe. And then we have our seasoning blend, which is 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon, and 1/4 teaspoon of fine grind sea salt. We have 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1/4 cup of heavy whipping cream, some sugar, and some flour. That is all you need to make these, and they are so delicious. And you can make them up ahead of time and serve them the next day or even the day after, and they're just as delicious. All right, so with our egg, you want to get 2 bowls. And it might seem silly that these are so big, but trust me, you're gonna want them this big. And we want to separate the egg yolk into one and the egg white into another. So to do that, I just crack the egg, separate it right in the middle, and then I use the shell as my place for the yolk to kind of fall in and out of so that the egg white goes out. And then put the egg yolk into the other bowl. All right, so once it's separated, you're gonna wanna add in 2 tablespoons of water to your egg white. Now, if your egg is room temperature, this is gonna make it a little bit easier to whip it. But if it's cold, it'll still whip up. It'll just take a little bit longer. Don't use a KitchenAid mixer for this unless you're making a double or triple batch. It's not enough volume for the KitchenAid to really get there and whip it up. So I recommend using a hand mixer, or you could whisk it by hand if you are so inclined, but it does take a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of time to do it that way. So I just use my electric mixer. And you can start off on low, but you're gonna wanna eventually go to high. So I'm gonna do this until soft peaks form. You don't need it really stiff, just soft peaks. Okay, the egg whites are starting to foam, but we're not quite ready. It's not leaving a soft peak quite yet. So keep going just a little bit longer. All right, that is perfect. A little soft peak forms, but it's not too stiff. You don't want it too stiff because it's gonna be too hard to fold into the batter. Now, I know probably you're like, oh gosh, is this really necessary? No, it's not. You don't have to do it this way, but your apple fritters are going to be more dense and doughy. This was basically the secret to getting a deep fried texture. Well, I have another secret too that helps with that, but this really did the trick, okay? After batches and batches and batches, when I finally did this, it worked. The reason I put in the water is just to increase the volume to make it easier to whip, okay? All right, so now we get into our other bowl here, and we can do this by hand. It's super easy. You wanna add in 3 tablespoons of sugar, and you see I have a little left over, okay? That's gonna become important a little bit later down the road. All right, then we can add in our spices, which I already went over what they were. And let's dice up our apple. So you wanna just wash your apple. You can leave the skin on, and if you're anything like me, then that's a big plus because I don't like peeling apples. Cut it right down the middle. Of course, if you don't like the skin, you can absolutely take it off. That's no problem either. And then just make slices with your knife, about a 1/4 inch thick, and then just little dices. You don't want them too big, but you also don't want them too small, because the idea is that you get a good texture, a good apple-y texture when you bite into them. Now, another ingredient that I have added in the past, but I just didn't add today, which you certainly can, is a little bit of lemon juice or even a little bit of lemon zest. That pairs nicely. Or if you have an orange you need to use up, put a little squeeze of orange juice in there, but no more than a teaspoon or 2, or you're going to throw your ratios off, okay, of your liquid to dry mixture. Now, ordinarily, when I'm doing this right now, I would have my air fryer preheating on the hottest setting with the cooking surface in, which I'm gonna be using the basket in the Ninja Foodi air fryer. But because it's a little bit loud, I'll just keep finishing up this prep and then we'll get preheated. But you definitely wanna preheat for a full 10 minutes for this recipe on the hottest setting you have on your air fryer. All right, once your apple's in, throw in your teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then just give everything a fold together. We're gonna break up that egg yolk a little bit, mix those spices together. Oh my gosh, the smell. Oh, it smells so good. All right, that looks perfect. Now we're gonna add in 2/3 of a cup of all-purpose flour. You could also use cake flour if you wanted to, but I know most people probably don't stock that in their pantry, so the all-purpose flour is fine. Now you're gonna get a nice crumbly mixture that really doesn't look like apple fritter dough at all. This is where the cream and the egg whites come into the mix. 1/4 cup of cream, just sort of splash it all over. Now, you know, sometimes when I'm making a batter or a dough, I'll tell you to add things in little bits at a time. But with this recipe, it has been consistent across the board that these are the ratios. So I feel really comfortable with you doing it this way. You can always add in half at a time, but I think you're gonna need the whole amount of everything that I'm including in this recipe. And you might even need some more. If you're, you know, in a really dry climate and your flour's really dry, it might need a little bit more liquid. Just add in a little bit of water or a little more cream. Either one's fine. I have tried the recipe with half and half and regular milk, and you can do that in place of the cream. But if you do that, then I do want you to add it in increments, because they're a thinner liquid and you don't want your batter to be too wet, okay? All right, now grab your egg whites and put about half of them in. No need to be particular. And now we just kind of fold together. You're gonna collapse the egg whites a little bit. They're not gonna stay really fluffy, but they still do their job. And their job is to create that light texture that you get when you deep fry. And if you skip this step, you're gonna have a denser, still delicious, but denser apple fritter. So just fold that in. Now you'll see our batter start to loosen up a little bit, and you're not seeing so much of the egg whites. Now we can go ahead and add in the rest. And fold that in. Now by this time, your air fryer will be preheated and you'll just move straight on to the next step. But since I did not preheat, I'm gonna do that right now, as soon as I show you what the final consistency should be. All right, that looks perfect, okay? Not all of the egg whites are completely dispersed in there, because I try to do this gently so that I keep as many of those light egg whites as I can, because that gives rise to our apple fritters and makes them extra delicious. Okay, next thing you wanna do is have some parchment paper. Depending on the kind of air fryer that you're using will depend on the shape and the size that you make your parchment paper. So whatever the basket is, like if I'm doing this in the Ninja Foodi XL grill using the basket and the air crisp function, then I use a whole piece like this, and I can actually do all 4 of them at once. When I'm using the Ninja Foodi or a basket style air fryer, I can only usually do 1 to 2 at a time. So that'll depend on your air fryer. Now, the important thing is, and I want to really show you this carefully. First of all, do not put in your parchment paper before you preheat, okay? Because if you put this down in the bottom with nothing holding it down, you start your air fryer, it's gonna suck up and it can catch on fire. So don't do that. The other thing you want to do when you're measuring out and cutting your parchment paper is make sure that it doesn't go up too far on the sides. You want it to really just sit on the bottom. And that is because when we put our apple fritters onto this parchment paper, we want it to hold it down. We don't want the edges to catch the air circulating and come up and fold onto our apple fritters, or it messes up the shape of them and can even impede the cooking process, okay? So those are just little tips that I've learned along the way after doing so many of these. Now I'm gonna preheat on broil, which is also grill in the European models, and that is the hottest setting on the Ninja Foodi, and I like to use it for preheating. But you just use whatever your hottest setting is. This is 450. And we're gonna preheat for a full 10 minutes, and then we will scoop the apple fritters into the air fryer, and I'll tell you all about that extra special secret that made these just like they were deep fried. Once your air fryer has completely preheated for that 10 minutes, then you're going to carefully lay in your parchment paper, okay? Wear hand protection if you feel like you need to. And then again, make sure that there's not too much coming up over the sides. All right, then you want to take like a nice ice cream scoop or something that's a couple of tablespoons, because we're going to put about a 1/4 cup or so in here, okay? So see, this is heaping right now. And put it on one side and spread it out a little bit. Now you can get at least 4 out of this batter, but you could do more if you wanted to make them smaller. All right, that looks like a good size right there. And then we're gonna do it again. I might get 6 out of this batter. And that could be because your apple's a little bit bigger. So I call for 1 cup of diced apple, but if your apple's a little bit bigger, don't worry about it. Just throw it in and you'll get an extra apple fritter out of it. Now you wanna try to get them not to touch. I see that I sort of made my parchment just a little bit too small on that one side, but we'll be okay. I hope, anyway, right? Because really, they shouldn't be touching. But anyway, we're gonna roll with it because that is the kind of stuff that happens in real life. And take a little bit of sugar and just sprinkle it right over the top. Less than a teaspoon is all you need, okay? On each one. All right, so then close your lid or push in your basket. Air fry, you wanna go to 375. And your time is 8 minutes. Okay. Now, the time may vary depending on what type of air fryer you have and how close your apple fritter is to the heating element. So definitely check on it in about 6 minutes. But in the Ninja Foodi 6.5 quart and the 8 quart that I've tested this in, it is 8 minutes. And even in the grill, the XL grill, it is 8 minutes. So I feel like that's a pretty good target time for you. But if it's your first time making them, check them at 6. All right, so it's been just about 6 minutes, and let's take a peek. Now, I don't normally do this now because I know 8 minutes is what I want to go for, but I thought, well, since we have these two going together, which I almost don't want to separate them because it looks like a heart. Oh my gosh, that looks so cute. But anyway, if this happens to you, just separate just like that. And while they look done, I know from experience that it's best to go the 8 minutes in the Ninja Foodi, okay? So they look nice and brown, and that's wonderful. And I felt the top, and it's nice and firm and crisp. But sometimes inside just needs a little bit longer. So as long as they're not looking like they're burning, leave them in the 8 minutes, okay? Okay, we are all done. They look absolutely gorgeous. Now, just lift them off of the parchment and onto a cooling rack. Oh my gosh, they are perfect. All right, there we go. Perfect. Now, you want them to cool before they get glazed because if not, the glaze will just go all over the place. So let them cool a little bit. While they're cooling, I'm gonna go ahead and finish up making up the rest of these, and then we will make up the glaze and get this finished up. All right, they look perfect, but I wanted to show you what's happened here because this could happen to you. And it's this little piece of paper flew up and impeded the way that these cooked. I mean, they're fine to eat. Everything's fine. They just aren't in those oblong shapes that I try to go for. So it's really important that when you're pouring these onto your parchment paper, number one, don't make the same mistake I did. Make sure your parchment paper is big enough that it fits on whatever cooking surface you're gonna cook these air fryer apple fritters on. And then get the batter as close to the edge as you possibly can without going over, okay? Kind of like a little game, right? That way these won't come up and impede the way that they cook. But you know what? It doesn't matter because they're perfect anyway. I mean, really, is anyone gonna say, wait a minute, your apple fritter has a square edge, you screwed them up? No, they're not. They're gonna eat them and say thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, now we just let them cool and we'll make up a glaze, get them glazed up, and then we will give them a taste. All right, so once they are cool to the touch, then we can go ahead and whip up the glaze and get them glazed. But I wanted you to hear this. I really hope the microphone's picking that up because it is super, super crunchy. And that is what makes these so delicious, just like if they are deep fried. And it's that little bit of sugar on top. All right, so the glaze that I'm gonna make up is really simple. We only need a few ingredients, but I'm gonna tell you it doesn't harden, okay? It's more of a thin icing, so to speak. So if you want a glaze that's going to harden, then I would look for a donut glaze on the internet. I'm not a big fan of powdered sugar and water, even with a little vanilla mixed in. I just don't like the flavor. It's super sweet, but not balanced in my opinion. So I do it this way and I don't mind that it doesn't harden, but that is totally up to you. 2 tablespoons of salted, melted, but also cooled butter, okay? So I melted it a while ago, but it's starting to cool and that's important. 1/4 cup of powdered sugar, 1/2 to 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and then a teaspoon of honey. That just balances it out a little bit, in my opinion. You can add more or less or skip it. It's perfectly fine. But I just found it to be a little bit too sweet, which is kind of funny because honey's sweeter than sugar. But too sweet without a flavor. Like the honey just really balanced everything out. And then just a pinch of salt, so maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon. And then just whisk it together and we're done. That's all you need to do. Now I'm using a vanilla extract and that's what's making this kind of on the tannish side. If you wanted a really nice bright white, you could use either there's white vanilla extract or you could skip the vanilla extract and just go with maybe a little splash of lemon juice or a little lemon zest to give it a little flavor. And that would be good. But I like the honey and the apples. I think it's, oh my gosh, so, so good. All right, there we go. Now it's not super thin. If you wanted a pourable glaze, you could actually put in a little bit of water. That would be perfectly fine. So then I just take a teaspoon, dollop it on, and then spread it out. And if they're slightly warm, like cool to touch, but still just a little bit warm, it will melt a little bit in places, and I think that gives a nice look. But just spread that out just like that. Oh my gosh, look, looks so good. These are pretty cool though, so I don't think I'm gonna have any melting. But they're still beautiful. And this makes enough for 4, which even though I thought I might be able to get 5 out of the batter, I still only got 4. So count on that. That's been consistent the whole way through. Or you could make them half the size, because honestly, they're pretty big, okay? So if you were serving them like at a brunch, I would make them half the size, definitely, because they're pretty big. I can only eat half of one, so Jeff and I usually split one. But there we go. Now you can wait a little bit if you want, but you don't have to because the glaze is not gonna harden up. So let me go ahead and open this up. Look at that. Oh my gosh. Oh. Unbelievable. Oh my goodness. They're perfect. Absolutely perfect. Crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside. The apples have the absolute perfect consistency. So they're not real hard, they're not real soft. Oh my gosh. I hope you love these.